Writing objectifies what had heretofore been subjective experience of the transcendent. Oral religions become the textual religions that we recognize today, and oral tradition becomes fixed in text. Fixity of sacred doctrine in text becomes a powerful check against paganism, heresy, and heterodoxy. Categories, we should note, largely missing from oral religions. A written text creates rigid doctrine out of myth and orthodoxy out of fluid, constantly changing oral tradition. Fundamentalisms of various forms and various intensities become the Achilles heel of textual religions and the frequent focus of violent conflict. This situation is only made worse by the fact that a literate religion moves doctrine beyond the confines of the tribe. Textual religions have historically tended to be religions not only of birth or of the family or clan or tribe, but of conversion. Like written knowledge itself, dedicated to semi-permanent media and fixed in both time and space, textual religious doctrine has a life of its own, beyond the person and beyond the group, and serves as an open invitation to all who read it and like it. And so we find ourselves moving in the early days of scribal literacy into an age where ideas and metaphysical realities come into contact and into conflict and vie for both attention and acceptance. Plato's cosmology, constructed early in the age of alphabetic literacy, is one of the first that we know of to abandon the monistic pantheism of oral antiquity and cleave immanence from transcendence. His dualistic view of reality as consisting of two realms, of the material and of the perfect ideal forms, was adopted early on during the spread of Christianity. By contrast, Aristotle's materialist view of creation and his confidence that the material world and material reality would reveal itself to us, that our senses would comprehend that revelation, and that our reason would interpret it and make sense of it, resulted in his virtual banishment from Christian medieval Europe until the 12th century. So we can see that writing managed at the same time to create a breach between immanent and transcendent experience, between sensory perception and imagination, between reason and faith, and at the same time forced human beings to take sides with one camp or another. The development of movable-type printing in the middle of the 15th century was the cultural equivalent of human intellect reaching a point of critical mass, a quantum leap in the evolution of communication technologies and the spread of knowledge. Evidence of its enormous influences on culture, its transformation, for instance, of a localized Florentine Renaissance into a European Renaissance, its instrumentality in the Protestant Reformation and the reorientation of Catholic practices and ecclesiastical authority, its facilitation of modern science, its role in the collapse of feudalism, and the rise of both nationalism and capitalism has been documented exhaustively elsewhere, especially in the work of Elizabeth Eisenstein, whose work I commend to you, by the way. So I'm not going to talk about any of that. But for the purposes of this presentation, it's enough to mention how the printing press reoriented the human senses, nurturing human propositional structures of thought and furthering the split between immanence and transcendence. As objective knowledge grew and spread with print literacy, print helped to begin what McLuhan called a wholesale attack on man's senses and common sense. In 1517, Martin Luther posted on the door of Wittenberg Cathedral his 95 Theses against the selling of indulgences, both challenging the authority of the Pope and the institutional church, and denying a fundamental doctrine of salvation. Luther, of course, was called a heretic and the leader of a schismatic movement by the institutional church, but became, to his supporters, the standard bearer for a reformation of that church. The engine of this reformation was the printing press. Francis Bacon began the formal dismantling of Aristotelian science and the method that supported it, syllogistic formal logic. In so doing, he also helped to undermine the foundations of both scholasticism Thomism, leaving medieval theology an intellectual orphan in the shadow of rapidly developing institutions of science and Protestantism. And Galileo, like Bacon and Luther, the product of a culture of widespread print literacy. That is to say, he was not alone in his attitude that revealed truth might be giving way to an entirely different kind of truth, a truth based on rigorous observation, measurement, testing, and inductive reasoning. Writing, Walter Rahn has told us, introduced an alienation within the human life world, one that has, quote, restructured consciousness, affecting men's and women's presence to the world and to themselves, and creating new interior distances within the psyche. The printing press took this alienation and amplified it, extending it to mass proportions. With printing and the beginnings of mass literacy, the distance between objective reality and metaphysical reality increased enormously. Immanence and transcendence sustaining a breach that has proven difficult, if not impossible, to bridge. In this way, literacy and the modern age contained, and eventually sowed, the seeds of their own postmodern, if not destruction, then certainly harm. And with the electronic simultaneity and instantaneity of postmodernism, the literacy-inspired rift between transcendence and immanence disappears, I suspect, because, as we shall see, transcendence itself begins to disappear. In the 1830s, Samuel F.B. Morse perfected telegraphy. Information began to move at roughly the speed of light. The first campaign, the first volley in a campaign of electronic communication that continues for the last century and a half. What hath God wrought was the first message sent over the telegraph. And it is a question I think we're still looking for an answer to. The electrification of communication techniques had profound implications for human civilization. It resulted not only in the radical acceleration and increase of information, the ease of access to information, and the connection of peoples in far-flung corners of the world, but also in the disembodiment of information. For the first time in human history, information need no longer be scratched, engraved, or written on some physical object, or spoken to you. Rather than moving on paper or papyrus at the speed of a man, a camel, a horse, or a locomotive, it was now able to move via electronic currents at roughly the speed of light. Electric media have a strong bias toward the senses, particularly the sense of hearing and vision. The profoundly presentational structure of visual images and nonverbal sounds, so characteristic of our late 20th and 21st century electric media, limit the nature and intellectual depth of the discourse that makes use of those images and sounds. This is not to say that there is no depth to the visual image, but that depth is presentational, and we interpret and experience it through presentational structures of thought, not propositional structures. We have reason to doubt, because we cease to experience, the existence of space in electric culture. Electricity obliterates space. We live in a permanent global here. We have reason to doubt because we cease to experience the existence of past and future in an electronic culture. Along with obliterating space, electric media make all time now. The electric world is a world of spaceless simultaneity. What happens anywhere in the world or in space, we know here and now. Electricity absorbs and eradicates the idea of the past, the concept of history. In their place, we get an ever new and ever renewable present. We live